Can you give a brief account of how you came and took up Krishna consciousness?
I needed to find Guru. Man came in wearing flowing white robes. He was an angel. I said, so he must have been an angel.
Did you feel betrayed?
I couldn't speak. I went numb. How can we trust these people?
You couldn't question about the Guru system. What was the turning point?
When Sulochan was murdered,
You were for anti-Ritvik. How did that transition happen?
I wrote my article to the GBC that they have to restore no need of any change. Just follow Prabhupada's instructions.
What were their motivations? What was the real motivations?
A lot of them are very shallow.
When Srila Prabhupada was leaving this material world, what was the mood in the temple?
My tears were falling on Lord Chaitanya's feet. I couldn't be with Prabhupada, but he allowed me to be with him.
Hare Krishna. Dandavat Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Welcome to ISKCON Bangalore.
Jai, thank you.
So today we have with us His Grace Ameyatma Dasa Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Ameyatma Prabhu is a very senior devotee of the ISKCON fraternity. He was directly initiated by Srila Prabhupada. He joined our movement formally in the year 1973. And if I'm correct, you first got Srila Prabhupada's book, or you started reading Srila Prabhupada's book in 1970.
70.
And prior to that itself, you were looking for a spiritual fulfillment or higher understanding, and that took you in various directions. So can you give a brief account of that initial beginning towards spirituality, and then how you moved forward and how you came and took up Krishna consciousness?
When I was 4 or 5, my parents were going to church, so I went to a Sunday school. The main thing I remember from that is they taught us to pray every day to the Father. So that I did from the time I was very young. Not just once a day. I would all the time be praying to the Father. Well, my parents stopped going to church when I was about 8. They had moved from a small community into Southern California, and it just wasn't the same. So they weren't irreligious. They just didn't like the ministers. So they stopped going to the church. But I kept reading the Bible at home. And when I was 17, one of my friends invited me to a youth summer camp at the church. And I thought, I haven't been for most of my life. So I went ahead and then the pastor and he convinced me. I was looking for my calling. What am I supposed to do in this life, And I became convinced I should just dedicate myself to God and preach His word. So at that time, I tried to become, like a born-again Christian. And but the first person I preached to as a Christian, his concept of God was that God was an old man. He was from Catholic Church, and his idea was that God was just an old man who wouldn't know how to have fun. And he wanted to, have fun and listen to rock and roll music and all. And I told him, well, God isn't just a boring person, and the spiritual world, His kingdom is not a boring place. So he asked me, well, what do you know? That's all he's ever heard. He said, what do you know different? And I realized I didn't, except I had been praying to God, the Father, for most of my life. And I always I knew He was a person. I knew related to Him as a person, but then I realized I didn't know anything about. So that set me off on a journey. And I was a library person. I always studied in the library, more than even the school itself. So the library became my place where I would try to find, I was researching, and within Christianity, I read the Bible, and I found there wasn't any real knowledge about God, what He looks like, what He does, what happens in His kingdom. And so I eventually started going into other religions. Judaism, which I found was basically the same. That's the Old Testament. And I went to Islam, which is almost the same as Judaism. And then I wound up then into Buddhism. And I thought, well, because that was the first time I had seen Sanskrit and Eastern philosophy and higher consciousness and chanting mantras. And I felt like this was very close. But after I chanted mantras for the impersonal nirvana and merging with the all oneness of where is God? I'm trying to find out what God looks like, the person. So I went back on my journey, and eventually I found books that led me to, actually, Vivekananda wrote, he didn't quote the verse, Tadvidi pranipatena panipasnena sevaya, but he did say that if you want to learn the absolute truth, you need to find one who already knows the truth, realized. So then I needed to find Guru. And that's when I was praying for my Guru to come in a book. And that book would tell me everything about God, what he looks like, what he does. And the next year, because I searched, was searching in the library for some time, and then Prabhupada's books came, the Krishna Book, which was the book I was searching for.
Krishna Book you found in the
Krishna
library?
Book and the Teachings of Lord Chaitanya and the Nectar Devotion, all those 3 books. And that one day I found them.
Oh.
And I told this, because that was 1970, and I never told anybody the story because it was 3 years later. I didn't know about temples. It took me 3 years to finally, find out about the Los Angeles temple and join. And I never told anyone the story until 1981 or 2. And the first person I told was Jayatirtha. He was my temple president when I first joined in Los Angeles. He became GBC. And then at that time I was in Detroit and he was GBC there because I was working on the museum. I told him the story because a person brought those books into the library. The librarian was telling me, because I walked up to the counter. Do you mind? It's going to be a little bit longer story.
Problem.
But
you can tell.
I brought those 3 books. I found first the Krishna Book, and I went. They didn't have computer, but I went and found that the library had 3 other books by Bhaktivedanta Swami, 2 other books, and the Teaching of Lord Chaitanya and Nectar Devotion. So I found them. They're on different aisles, and I walked up and set them down on the counter, and the librarian was, "Where did you get those books? How did you get those 3 books?" And I went to tell her about, finding in their card catalogs and all. And then she told me, just yesterday, there's a man came in wearing flowing white robes and a shaved head with a ponytail. And he set those 3 books down at the very same spot on the counter and said, "Here, God wants you to have these books." She said, "Did you know him?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, "He was an angel." I said, "I was praying to God to please send me books that would explain who he is." And I said, "So he must have been an angel." And she just was trembling after that. So the first person I told the story to was Jayatirtha. He was the person who brought the books.
Really?
Yeah.
So Jayatirtha went and gave that librarian
He
that books.
was, at that time in 1970, because this was right after the Krishna Book came out, they had just got the box of Krishna books in. And this was the first one they distributed, at least in that box that they got in Los Angeles.
Which library was this?
And they had also, that was a hardbound book, and they had the Teachings of Lord Chaitanya came out before hardbound, and they had the Nectar of Devotion that came out in March or so of 1970. They're all hardbound books, and they didn't know how to distribute them. He was working with Spiritual Sky Incense, and he was servicing an account that was there in West Covina, Southern California. And he knew, because that store he serviced, the library was just down the road. He could see it from that store. So he knew he was going to that store, and he thought, let me take these books to that library and see what they'll take them. And on the way there, he told me he was trying to think what to tell them. And he just came up, "Here, God wants you to have these books."
And that librarian bought it? Paid money
That
on it,
I
or
did
was it
not
given?
quite understand. I didn't ask Jayatirtha if he donated them or if they paid for them. I didn't ask that part.
Okay.
He just said he gave them to the library.
Books.
So I don't know the detail.
Sure. Okay. Wonderful.
I was praying for that book while Srila Prabhupada was writing it, translating it. And I kept looking for that book. And as soon as it came out, Jai Tirtha said that was the first of the Krishna book that was distributed, that he took to the library, and at least that they got in from Los Angeles. And so it all worked out. And I was praying that the book my spiritual master would write would tell me everything about what God looks like. As soon as I saw the photo of Radha and Krishna, I didn't need to read anything. I could see this is what God looks like.
So you read that book, you got inspired, and then you reached out to the temple, and it took you 3 years to come to that point. And then you joined the temple as a missionary. As a brahmachari, is it?
Yeah, and in July, I came in like April or so, 1973. Attended Prabhupada's class in the Bhagavatam class, and then he was only there that one day, so I only got he was there other days, but that was the only day I got to go to the class. And then I joined in July of 1973.
So at that time, Jai Tirtha was the president of the Los Angeles temple, and then. From there in the temple, what services were you doing? Like
the first thing, they had lots of brahmachari, of course, scrubbing the floors and washing the pots. But we went to the spiritual sky and was dipping the incense, and then book distribution.
Okay, you were in book distribution.
And Tripurari was there in Los Angeles. He was doing, big, and a number of devotees, Bopa Dev. And so there were devotees who were doing really good on the book distribution. And I was praying and praying. I just wasn't able to distribute that much. So I started praying to Prabhupada that I felt like I had talents that weren't being utilized. And I was praying to him if I could find some other service that I could serve in. Prabhupada sent a letter. He wanted artists to come to Mayapur to help with the project.
So you were a sculptor, is it?
So art was a hobby.
Art was a hobby. And what kind of art? Sculpting? Painting. Okay.
So I asked if I could go to, I asked Karandar if I could go to India. And finally, he and Jai Tirtha agreed, but I'd have to do some service at the BBT mail order department to earn the ticket. But during that time, since they knew I wanted to be an artist, then Narayan was in charge of the artists before the BBT artists came. And so Prabhupada came, and just after I was initiated, I was initiated, he came and then I was initiated, but right after I was initiated, Narayan came up to me and said, Prabhupada's garden, they don't have a seat for him, and they just made this 4-foot by 4-foot plywood box. He said, it's just painted white. So he said, you want to be an artist? Paint something artistic on it. I said, well, what do I paint? And he said, you want to be the artist. You figure it out. I knew I couldn't paint Krishna. I couldn't paint the holy name. Prabhupada can't sit on top of Krishna. And I don't know why. I chose a cow. I thought Shiva sits on a bull. And so I painted a cow. Prabhupada never complained. It's Mataji, but he never complained. Actually, I got Prabhupada's mercy in his garden, but I wasn't there. Narayan went to the garden. On the top of the box, after I painted the cow, I just painted a lotus mandal. And Narayan came in just before they took it down the garden. He said, what is that? I said, that's a lotus flower. He said, that is no lotus flower. He said, that looks like impersonal art. I said, no, it's a lotus mandal. Oh, we can't let Prabhupada see that. So Narayan was Russian. He spoke very bold like that. So I said, and so he told a devotee, do you have something to cover it? He went and got an Islam prayer rug and put on top. And they took it down to Prabhupada, the garden. Prabhupada's garden in LA, he said, was his favorite place because the devotees made it just for him. It was a part of the parking lot, and they tore up that part of the parking lot and turned it into a garden for Srila Prabhupada. So he always said it was his favorite place. So Narayan said when Prabhupada walked in the garden, he saw the painting and he was like, he had smiling and all. And then he said, just before he sat down, he lifted up the blanket and Narayan was going, oh no, he's going to see that painting. But he said, Prabhupada smiled, sat down, and lifted up his knee and lifted up the rug again and looked, and he said, who has painted this? And Narayan said, you just initiated in Ameyatma. And he said, tell him he has done very nice. I like this.
So
I like
you
this
received the
very much.
attention of Srila Prabhupada, positive attention.
Yeah, so I got Prabhupada's mercy several times, but I wasn't even present. I wasn't in the garden.
Okay.
But I got his mercy. I got his mercy 2 times in the garden, and I wasn't there.
Okay. So then how did you move further in your...
So after I painted that, then they were saying, then Narayan said, you should be painting for Prabhupada's books. Still forget about going to Mayapur. The BBT artists were moving from New York to Los Angeles, and the BBT is now headquartered in Los Angeles. So he said, you just stay here. There was an artist, Devahuti, who had painted a number of paintings that Prabhupada very much liked, the Rasa dance, the stealing of the gopis' clothes. She painted a number of paintings, and I liked her paintings. Prabhupada liked her paintings. And she was elderly Mataji. She was almost Prabhupada's age, all gray hair and elderly Mataji. So she gave me some training on the painting, and all she did was talk about Srila Prabhupada and just nectar stories. And, so I started training to paint for the books. Then she heard that Prabhupada, I painted 3 paintings of Srila Prabhupada, but I never actually got any painting in the book. Although that cow the Prabhupada sat on in the garden, that actually went into Chaitanya Charitamrita with Prabhupada sitting on it. So I do have a painting where Prabhupada's sitting on my painting. But and I painted 3 paintings, 3 or 4 of Srila Prabhupada. But then she heard Bhardraj is coming, and he was the main artist, and Prabhupada sent him to Mayapur to learn to make the dolls for the diorama exhibits. So she said, he's coming here. She heard he's coming to Los Angeles. She said, if you want to please Prabhupada by artwork, then you should work with Bhardraj. So as soon as he came, I joined that project. I joined as an artist, but when we made the first diorama, or just making some of the first dolls, I asked Bhardraj, how are we going to display these? Said in India, you make a platform and you put the dolls on and you put a plaque in front, explains it. I'm from Southern California, entertainment capital, the movies, Hollywood, Disneyland. I went many times. And I thought, well, this is boring. So I said, let's do a soundtrack. Let's make a tape. And first just music. And then I said, we can have a narrator on the tape. Then we can put a voiceover for Krishna and Arjuna. And we can do lighting, and we can synchronize the lights to the show, make an actual show. Oh, it's not how it's done in India, Prabhu. That's not how it's done. But I kept suggesting it. Finally, he agreed. And then he came in and said, this is how we're going to do the museums from now on. So we started to do all that. And we designed all the exhibits. We designed where every single light would go, everything. And nobody asked Prabhupada if he approved. So Lochan, the one who made the Prabhupada Murtis, the original, he made them for the exhibit at the LA temple, because the first exhibit is Prabhupada in the Radha Damodar temple translating. So that's where the first Murti was made for a diorama, diorama exhibit. And Prabhupada saw them, and he said, yes, they can be used as Murtis. And he wrote Karandar a letter, because Karandar, after he came back, he left ISKCON. He came back and Prabhupada made him GBC in India. But that didn't last long. He again, gave up that service. He came back and he was looking for another service. And Rameshwar had him become the financial director for the museum project. So he and I shared an office. But Prabhupada wrote to him a letter about the Murtis and how the worship of the Murti of the spiritual master is the same as Krishna. One should worship the Murti of the spiritual master on the same level as the Murti of Krishna.
Wow.
And even he said in that letter, temples that just have preaching centers, temples that just have a photo of Gaurnitai should not have his Murti. They have to have a deities first. At least Gaurnitai deities before they have his Murti.
Prabhupada's Murti. Okay.
Murti is to be worshipped on the same level.
Okay. So then after that you continued in the same service as making?
Up until 1980, because we went to, after the first museum in Los Angeles, Prabhupada approved the next museum to be in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
But Rameshwar started involving Ambarish.
Mm-hmm.
And then Prabhupada wrote some letters and asked Ambarish to get involved.
Mm.
So then it was decided the second museum would be in Detroit.
That's right.
Because that's where Ambarish was staying, his family, the Ford family.
Mm.
So we made the next museum at the Fisher Mansion in Detroit.
Mm.
That took me until 1984.
So now during the tumultuous time where Srila Prabhupada was leaving this
let me
material
just
Leela.
I interrupt you if I can about
No
this.
problem.
1984, I was done with the museum, and I came back to LA, and then because when Bardwaj left in 1979 or so, 79, when he fell down, actually he gave up the service and fell down for a while. So at that point, Rameshwar asked me to be in charge of the project, and I was doing the computers, the audio-visual presentations. I felt I had too much. So I turned down to be, and I asked if someone else could help me with it. So we selected Adidev to help with the management. He was supposed to work with me, but he just took over the project. So I just let him. And then, but in 84, Adidev he left the project. So I was back in charge of it again. I had the meeting with Rameshwar about the future for the Fate project, for the Dial Museum project. Prabhupada wrote us letters saying he wanted exhibits in all his temples, all of the temples or ISKCON temples all over the world. That was his instruction to the members of the Fate project. So that was like an instruction to me because I was a member. Rameshwar is telling me now that I was back in his zone, he said that his BBT money will make these exhibits, and he only wants them for his zone. So all the exhibits had to have mentioned him in it. So they can't be used by any other temple. And I said, that is not Prabhupada's instructions to us. And he told me, I'm meeting with him in his room with some of his disciples there. And I told him that this is Prabhupada's letter. This is an instruction from Prabhupada. He told me Prabhupada's instructions are nearly 10 years old. This is 1984. So he said his instructions are nearly 10 years old. They're outdated. They're no longer relevant. Those are his exact words. They just left an impression, I know. And he said, in case you haven't noticed, Srila Prabhupada is no longer living.
My God.
There are now 11, well, he said now, because then there was more than 11. He said, there are now new acharyas, and your duty is to now take surrender to one of us and take our instructions. That was the straw on the camel's back for me. We were both sitting down. I stood up and I just told him, you and the other GBC who think like you are ruining Srila Prabhupada's mission. And I just let loose on him. I went off for a couple minutes and I thought for sure his disciples are going to jump me, and start beating me, but they just sat there. And then that was the end of the Fate project. Rameshwar cut off the funding after that. He told me, you make like a pebble and bloop, drop back into the material ocean and bloop. And I told him, Rameshwar, I can never leave Srila Prabhupada. I said, it's time for you to leave. He left a year later. I didn't.
My God.
But that was the end of my service that was the end of the project because he cut off the funding, and it was a project Srila Prabhupada very much wanted. So for many years I was, in that way, I didn't have service for many years. And I started a computer mail order business, and I donated computers to the BBT and helped them with things, but I didn't really have a service.
So, okay, this is part. So during those last phases of Srila Prabhupada's personal Leela in this material world, what were the various experiences? Los Angeles was one of the most important centers of the ISKCON movement itself. Prabhupada loved Los Angeles. So 1977, can you take us back through what events were going on
We did not know. I did not know, especially I did not know, and I don't think most of the devotees there knew that Prabhupada actually announced that he was going to be leaving this world soon, which he did in May 16th, May 19th, whatever it was.
From January itself, we started inviting. From January 1977, when his health started failing, he was sure that he's going to leave.
Well, we didn't hear it. And because in 1976 was the last time he came to Los Angeles. And so it was the last time I saw him, basically. And so, but by May, when Prabhupada announced he was leaving, we didn't hear that, but we heard he was getting ill. We heard he was not well. And, we were doing the 24-hour kirtans and different things and praying all the time for Srila Prabhupada's health. But we didn't know it was actually he would be leaving. When nobody wanted to, come to terms with that. But then about 8 weeks before Prabhupada left, it was setting in. We heard more and more bad news, from Vrindavan. There was to make a phone call from Vrindavan was really hard. To make an international call, telegrams, and even they you had to go to Mathura or somewhere to make a telegram. So there was no internet. There was nothing. So we finally started hearing the reports are coming in not so good. So Bhardraj decided he was going back. He's going to Vrindavan. Right after that, I decided I'm going to have to go because I want to be with Prabhupada. I want to see him one last time. I just want to be there with him. And I never left America. I had not, so I had to figure out a passport, visa, all these things. But just a few days later, Rameshwar came. He had been there. And I was thinking, why would he leave Vrindavan and come here when Prabhupada's so ill? And he told everyone he had a special message. Everyone come to an Istagosti the next day morning. And then his Istagosti he came with a message from Prabhupada. And Prabhupada's message is he does not want anyone to leave their service. You all stay and continue your service and do not just come whimsically to come to Vrindavan to be with him. He does not want that. And he very clearly said this was Prabhupada's request. And I, in my heart, I was feeling like, why? Prabhupada, why would he deny us to come to see him again? And actually after that day later, when I was alone, I actually cried because I realized I won't be seeing Srila Prabhupada again. I won't have his merciful glance. That was a very special thing for me, was Prabhupada's glance, Just when he would see and you would have eye-to-eye contact. It was just the most very special thing. So I cried because I thought I'll never see him again. And I couldn't understand why would Prabhupada not want us to go see him? And then Satsvarup came and he gave the same message. And so that was about 4 weeks or so. And then Prabhupada left. And then a week to maybe 2 weeks, but 10 days, something, Bhardraj came back from India. And there was about 45 devotees at the doll project at that time. And he would give his own, telling us the stories of Prabhupada's last month or so. And at one point he told us that Prabhupada had requested he wanted all his disciples to come. And we're like, what, Bhardraj? That's not what we heard, And he said, no, I was there. I was in the room. He said twice, Prabhupada said. He said the first time Prabhupada made the request, and then he said it was about a week later, it was Bhardraj, Hamsaduta, and Upendra were in Prabhupada's room, just 3 devotees. And Prabhupada had been asleep for some time. He woke up, he looked around the room, said, where are my disciples? Why are they deserting me? I can't remember the exact wording. It's there, and I have it in my book, and it's in the Veda base as well. It's in a letter, but that Rameshwar wrote. But because what do I want to say? I didn't know about that letter until I was doing the research on the book and the video. But and they quote the same thing from Upendra's diary. that it was just the three of the devotees there in Prabhupada's room. And Prabhupada looked around and was asking where, and Bhargava was telling the stories that Prabhupada was practically in tears. Where are the devotees? Why haven't they come? And so when we heard that, I had to go and I went to Rameshwar. I said, who's telling the truth? I said, this is what Bhargava told me. You told us. Prabhupada said he didn't want us to come. He just finished class. We were walking across the street, and his office is on the other side of the street. And so he stopped. He looked one shoulder, looked the other, see who might hear, and then he said, come to my room. So we went to his room, and then he told me the whole thing.
Rameshwar.
Yeah. I don't have the time probably now to explain the whole story. I have it in my book, but he told me the whole reason why. But at least the beginning part I'll explain. There were two Sankirtan book distributors. It showed up in Vrindavan, and they were not, and he asked them how they came, and they were pocketing the collections from the books until they had enough money to buy the tickets. And they told him that a number of Sankirtan devotees are doing the same thing. This was now toward the end of October, or at least in October, middle of October, and the Christmas marathons start in the end of November. And that's where the temples in the West, in America and Europe, get 50% of their income was from those marathons. So Rameshwar is telling me if all the Prabhupada had told in May that he was leaving. 5 months later, it was now October, and he hadn't left yet. He said if Prabhupada were not to have left for another 5 months and all the devotees came, the temples all had mortgages. And he said the banks would foreclose on all the temples. There would be no more ISKCON. So he sat there saying, Ameyatma, I saved ISKCON. And he explained this whole thing. So as he was explaining, I realized his idea was that he saved ISKCON from Srila Prabhupada. He didn't say it in this way, but he considered that Prabhupada's request that all the devotees come was a foolish request that was going to ruin ISKCON if it was carried out. So he told me that when he saw the Sankirtan devotees, he knew he had to do something. Then a few days later, he heard that Prabhupada requested everyone to come. And he told me, when I heard that Prabhupada requested everyone, he said, I knew I had to do something to keep the devotees from hearing that request. To keep devotees from hearing Prabhupada's request. Or carrying it out and fulfilling Srila Prabhupada's request. He knew he had to do something to stop it. Now, I will just give him some credit that he was thinking that if everyone came, it would be the end of the movement. The temples would all be foreclosed. But they were instead of going to Prabhupada and asking.
Correct. On their own, they were taking decisions.
They made the decisions. And I give the example, my father passed away a few years later. He only had 3 children. My brother was in one state 1,000 miles away. My sister in another state. They're thousands of miles away. They both came. I was there locally. And we all met with my father. But they could only stay for a weekend, and they all went back. My father got to see everyone again. They got to see him, and then everyone went back. Prabhupada could have, he wasn't a fool. He knew the temples had mortgages.
Absolutely.
He was totally aware of that. He wasn't going to let anything happen bad to the temples. He just wanted to see his disciples again, just like my father wanted to see his children again. And we wanted to see him. And he was giving us that opportunity. And they took that opportunity away from Prabhupada and away from us by lying to us on Prabhupada's name, saying Prabhupada said he didn't want us to come when he said just the opposite. I learned that 1 week, 10 days or so after Prabhupada left this world, that our new leaders, they were already GBC, but now they are the only leaders left in ISKCON. And they just lied to us on Prabhupada's name, just made a great offense to their own spiritual master by denying his last request. That's a last personal request. Prabhupada wanted to see all his disciples again, his children.
Do you think this is beyond what is being mentioned, that we wanted to save ISKCON, or there was some other agenda in stopping you? Devotees coming from the West.
I know Rameshwar. We were, when I joined, we were brahmacharyas in the same, I think he was sincere. And he told me it was his idea to stop. And then he went to Tamal. He didn't go to Prabhupada, but Tamal was Prabhupada's gatekeeper for even the other GBC. They had to go to Tamal. But instead of Tamal saying, let's ask Prabhupada, you have a concern, let's see what Prabhupada said. Instead, Tamal approved Rameshwar's decision that he should come back and tell everyone not to go. That was his, according to Rameshwar, it was his idea.
So you mean to say Tamal was more conspiratorial, whereas Rameshwar was more... Is that your take?
Maybe not on this exact issue, but overall, I would confirm that. Yeah, he didn't have a really great reputation with a lot of devotees, and I didn't have that much association with him. But I had enough. I've seen him a number of times in LA, and but I didn't really have that much personal association with him. But I've heard from so many others that.
Okay. So during that 1977, when Srila Prabhupada was leaving this material world, and you were in Los Angeles, and at that time you were doing the same sculptural.
I was working with
with
the Faith.
So, what was the mood in the temple, and did you experience? What were your experiences?
You mean when actually Srila Prabhupada left, or what?
Yeah, during Srila Prabhupada left.
I don't know if I went, but I was dressing Gaura-Nitai. That was my service.
Your Pujari morning service it was.
Yeah.
And post that you used to go to your
And after that I would go to the Fate Project. So, and then every night I would put Lord Chaitanya in their night clothes too. So I was...
So morning and evening you had daily services.
I was considered their main Pujari.
Okay.
So I went on the altar to dress them that day. And as soon as I got on the altar, I just started crying. Uncontrolled. I didn't know why I was crying. I didn't know what. I just got, and I ran off the altar because, and the Nectar Devotion says one should not cry in front of the deities. And so I just ran off the altar, tried, and went back on repeatedly. Every time I went in front of the Gaura-Nitai, because when Rameshwar announced that not to go, that he didn't want us to, that Prabhupada didn't want us to go to Vrindavan when Prabhupada was still living, that day, I just made a prayer. Rameshwar announced that in the temple room. The deity doors were open. I looked up to Lord Chaitanya and I just made a prayer. Lord Chaitanya, if I can't be with Srila Prabhupada when he leaves, then I want to be with you. I didn't know what I meant by that. I just made that prayer and then I forgot about it. And every time I'd go on that altar that day, I just started crying. And a couple of times the other pujaris would look over and see me and I'd run off the altar. And then it got to the point where I was putting on the dhoti of Lord Chaitanya, and that point I had my arms around, because it ties in the back, the dhoti. In the LA temple, you can't go around behind the deities, so you have to dress them
in the front.
Yeah, by sitting on the altar and dressing them. And so I had my arms around Lord Chaitanya, and the tears just started pouring out. And I felt so bad because my tears were falling on Lord Chaitanya's feet, and I was thinking, how offensive I was. And I had no idea what was going on, and I couldn't see anything because all the tears of everything turned into a blur. And I just felt Lord Chaitanya was embracing me. I don't share that. I did on my video, and it's a very personal thing for me. And I get very emotional. I'm a very emotional person, but I just felt Lord Chaitanya was embracing me, and I felt ecstatic, and I felt like I'm making offense because my tears were falling on his feet. But I finally ran off the altar, composed myself, and I finished dressing them.
Did somebody see you in this state?
I don't think so.
Did somebody ask you what happened?
No one asked.
Nobody asked.
And I never told anybody until this time when I was making my video on this presentation. I think I told my wife, but that was all. But then after I dressed them, we came in the temple. There was the Guru Puja, there was greeting the deities, Guru Puja. I think it was right at the end of Guru Puja. The Rameshwar came into the temple, and his face was just gray, and And
just after you finished this experience,
after after the greeting of the deities,
in the morning,
that same morning, that same day.
So that means it was early morning. That means the previous night, Prabhupada is in Indian time.
Well, no. So he came in and he announced that Srila Prabhupada has just left this world. Mm-hmm. Everybody, there was just a big moan through the whole temple. And I started crying. Next to me was Parikshit. He just let out with a wail and started crying. Parikshit was one of the artists, BBT artists. We were, and I had forgotten about my prayer. And then Rameshwar is explaining what time Srila Prabhupada left. It was the evening in India, but it was the morning, morning for us in Los Angeles. And when he gave the time, our local time, I realized that was around 6 a.m. That's right when I was tying Lord Chaitanya's dhoti around, when the tears just started coming. And I remembered that. And anyway, I looked up at Lord Chaitanya because the doors were open when he made that announcement, because we just had the greeting and before the Bhagavad. So
should give some tissue.
I'm sorry, what's that?
No, continue.
Oh, so when I looked over at Lord Chaitanya and I said, and I had that same, I said, well, I couldn't be with Prabhupada, but I could be with you. I said, and then I remembered the prayer that I had given that day when Rameshwar told us not to come. And then I was like, Lord Chaitanya, he allowed me to be with him. I couldn't be with Prabhupada, but he allowed me to be with him. So yes, that was my experience of Prabhupada's leaving this world.
Wonderful. So you're lucky, you're special that Mahaprabhu personally reciprocated your feelings.
Yeah, somehow.
Yeah.
I'm not an advanced devotee. I don't deserve, but somehow he did that.
You got a very personal experience.
And I never shared that with anyone because it was I didn't want to, I just didn't go out and tell everyone, this is what happened. I just never said it.
Yeah. Like when you say that this instruction of Srila Prabhupada to invite all his disciples to come to Vrindavan were not shared to the rank and file devotees.
Not just not shared. They told us just the opposite.
And it was given a contrary message was communicated.
And using Prabhupada's name.
So
they were lying to us.
Did you feel betrayed?
When he told me that, I was sitting Rameshwar is telling me, I couldn't speak. I went numb. That's the one feeling I felt, and that's the name of one word. I just went numb. My feelings went numb. I felt like the future just went black because there are leaders now. Prabhupada's not here. We don't have anyone else higher to go to than, there are GBC. There are now the leaders of the movement. And they had just lied to us on Prabhupada's name. Everything went black. My future went black. The ISKCON's future went black. I just thought, how can we trust these people? How can we trust whatever they tell us?
What else do you think were held back from the devotees? One is this. Do you think many other aspects also were held back?
And obviously that was my first question after that. And after that meeting with Rameshwar, I wanted to tell everyone these men should be removed as GBC. But then a week or so later, we started hearing that there was a list Prabhupada wrote where he gave the names of the next gurus, the next acharyas, and Rameshwar, Satsvarup, Tamal, they were all on that list. And I'm thinking, because Rameshwar said he met with Tamal, he approved this idea, and Satsvarup came and upheld it, that we were not to go. Prabhupada didn't want us to go. So I'm thinking, how could Prabhupada have named these same men as guru? How could Krishna have allowed that the next acharyas in our line are people who just offended Srila Prabhupada and offended all of his disciples because they kept us from going? And
actually, it was like these people held back the death wish of Srila Prabhupada.
Yes, his dying personal request. Yeah, it was a personal request, and they made sure it could not be followed instead of executing the order of the spiritual master.
Okay. What else do you think these people held back?
The thing is that list The list.
What list?
They called it the list, and Prabhupada refers to it as a list on October 18th. He was referring to the July 9th letter.
So the July 9th letter was
now called
as list.
It was called the list because it had the list of the 11 men.
Okay.
We were told from the beginning that there was a list of gurus, the list that Prabhupada had made as gurus.
Okay.
Bhardraj was a senior devotee. He joined in 67 or 68. You know, he was a senior devotee. And he had asked Rameshwar, when we heard about that list, he had asked Rameshwar, he wanted to see the list. Bhardraj and I would have private discussions, and he said he just doesn't believe that Prabhupada would have selected Tamal Krishna. You know, he just could not believe that Tamal would have been selected as a guru or a number of the others, you know, Rameshwar, you know. And they had, Rameshwar was sold out to Prabhupada's books distribution. There was no question. He was totally sold out to distribution of Srila Prabhupada's books. That is to his great glory. And he made sure that Chaitanya Charitamrita was done within the 2 months, you know, that Prabhupada gave him. So he had, but his character, on a personal level, was not that of a pure devotee. He would say very, demeaning things about other devotees. He would, it just didn't have the character of a pure devotee. So we couldn't believe that, but Bhardraj was telling me he couldn't believe
that his name was included in the list.
And he couldn't believe his name wasn't included. Bhardraj couldn't believe his own name wasn't there.
His name wasn't wasn't there.
He thought, well, if Rameshwar's name is on there, at least his should have been, because he was a more senior devotee. But he couldn't believe there was name. He wanted to see the list himself to make sure that it was Prabhupada who wrote it. So he asked Rameshwar, and Rameshwar told him that it is for GBC only. And he told him that Prabhupada had given verbal instruction that isn't included in that list. And if you just read the list, it'll mislead devotees. They'll get the wrong impression. So, but the GBC were given verbal instructions, referring most likely to the May 28th meeting. And he said that without those, the GBC got those verbal instructions so they understand the entire instruction. And the devotees, if they read that letter, will not understand. We didn't even, but the list. So he refused to let Bhardraj read it. So up till that point, we had never seen it. Later, we found out that it was a letter. Later, by 1985 or 86, when Sulochan got a copy of all of Prabhupada's letters. Now, in 1984, when I came back to Los Angeles, because BBT was funding for the Fate project, the Diorama project, so I was good friends with Rajendranath, who was the BBT, head of the BBT. So another devotee had a stack of Prabhupada's letters. He worked in the BBT archives. Rabindranath, he's now the head pujari, has been head pujari in Los Angeles. I think he still is. He had a stack of letters, and he loaned me the copy to make copies. So I went to the BBT, was using their copier machine, and Rajendranath came in and asked me what I was copying. I said, "Oh, these are letters of Prabhupada." Not realizing he's the head of the BBT, he would have access. I thought, he'd want his own copies, But then he said, devotees are not to have copies. The GBC has said that Prabhupada's letters are off limits. They're banned from the devotees. This is Prabhupada's instructions. The instructions of my guru. So he said, they're personal instructions to that person. They're not general instructions. And I said, well, not these letters. These letters are Prabhupada's letters to the GBC on how they are to manage. And he said, especially those letters, Prabhu.
Well, not only individual letters, even GBC letters, that is even more special.
Especially those. And then he said, I'm not supposed to tell anyone, but he said, Rameshwar and Tamal Krishna decided that there is instructions in those letters that the GBC are not following. If the rank and file members see that the GBC aren't following the instructions Prabhupada gave them, they'll lose faith in the GBC, and then there'll be no more ISKCON left. Devotees won't respect the GBC, and it'll be the end of ISKCON.
This is what Vrajendranath told you.
That is what he was saying that Rameshwar had told him. So that's why they banned all of Prabhupada's letters. I didn't know that until 1984, and I didn't realize, that because Prabhupada's letters, the BBT didn't have them. They, when Prabhupada left, the call went out. Everyone who has a letter by Srila Prabhupada
voluntarily sent it to them.
Yeah, send the original or a copy to the BBT. So that's how the BBT got all those letters. Most everyone sent their letters. Not every letter is there. Some devotees never sent them, but most did. So. So that, and then when they had the copies, they were just archiving them. And so, and Sulochan wanted his wife, he was Prabhupada disciple, his wife was a new Bhaktin, and she wanted to take initiation from Kirtanananda. And he had heard that Prabhupada had written some letters at one point where he had not favorable with Kirtanananda, that he had done some. So he just wanted to read all the letters. And he knew a devotee, and they had all of the letters were on microfilm. So he got a copy of all of Prabhupada's letters on microfilm. And that's how he went through, and then he found the July 9th letter, what we call the July 9th, the Ritvik directive. And that's because we were just told for that whole time, which was now, 8 years after Prabhupada left, 8, 9, 10 years, that Prabhupada, in that list, that he had selected these men as gurus. And in the 1978 paper, the GBC came out with, it says it in the list where he gave a list of Ritviks and said the same thing he said in May 28th, that these men on his disappearance would become actual gurus. I thought that, because it said, in that list, he said the same thing as he said on May 28th. So, Sulochan also got a transcript of that May 28th meeting. And Prabhupada never said on his disappearance these men are to become guru, and it doesn't say that in the letter.
Correct.
So that is where devotees now got access and started to put this idea that Prabhupada wanted actually a Ritvik system. He wanted to remain the actual Diksha Guru through a Ritvik system. And that's why it took so long for that to come out. And then even then it took years, slowly a few devotees coming to that conclusion, and Jasodananda, saying that this is what he's been saying all along, And so it took some time for that to bubble up and come up because we didn't have access to these things. And I'll just say that in my research later, as I was researching this topic to make the video presentation and now this book, a devotee just sent me in an email the actual handwritten questions the GBC asked, their questions in that May 28th meeting, with the two of them being about the initiations, and the handwritten report that was done. And I'm pretty sure it was Satsvarup who wrote those. He was GBC secretary at the time. So, and that handwritten report is the only thing that the rest of the GBC ever saw for a decade or more, because they also didn't have a copy of the tape. Tape was made on a reel-to-reel Uri recorder, a small reel-to-reel 5-inch reel, and sent off to the archives, and it wasn't a lecture. It didn't go on the ministry.
So, you have covered all these topics in your system for initiation.
That is in
your
the book, yes.
Okay, in this book, it's all there.
Yes.
You have analyzed all these things.
Yes.
So in terms of...
Because that report is what threw off the rest of the GBC. Most of them were sincere, and they weren't trying to hijack Prabhupada's mission. At least most of them. And I won't speak, for Tamal, but but most of them weren't purposely trying to do. They were sincere devotees who got that report, and it says that Prabhupada said he would soon select men who would be, on his disappearance, initiate their own disciples, Prabhupada's grand disciples. So they thought they were trying to do what Prabhupada wanted.
Now, you see, the incident of not informing the devotees happened in 77, and post that you continued. Then you had an experience where funding was taken away from you. By whom was that?
1984, Rameshwar
said he will not fund your thing.
He stopped funding for the project.
So these was all direct attacks on you. That in the sense that you felt, cornered or something like that. But yet, you didn't, or you couldn't question about the Guru system, about the things like that. What was the turning point for you to take up that I want to understand what is this, or you come out and make a book like this? How did how did that evolve?
Yeah, when we started hearing about Ridvik, and I'll just say that when Sulochan was murdered, that was after Rameshwar stopped the funding, and I had actually moved out of the LA community. I was living in Bhaktivedanta village, not village, anyway, it was where the Gurukula was, up in California. There was a Gurukula on Three Rivers. And at that time it was still an active temple.
You lived in Alachua also? No.
Yeah, that was later. But I was living there, and I just heard about a devotee being murdered. I didn't know it was Sulochan.
Did you know Sulochan?
I knew him. Okay. We weren't like close friends, but I'd been to his house, and when he was in New Vrindavan, I had seen him there, and then I saw him in Los Angeles. So we knew each other. And I always considered him a very sincere devotee, but I didn't know it was him. So I was not there, and I wasn't in the community of Los Angeles at that time. Then I came back for a little while, and I got really bad allergy from the smog, and I had to move up in the mountains all by myself in the Northern California because the air was so clean up there. So from 87, as the Zono Acharya came to the end and all that, I was not, again, involved with the devotees. And so when a lot of this came out about the Ridvik in the early days, I was basically on my own, getting my health back. And so but in 1990, at the GBC North American meetings, they had the meeting with Jasoda Nandan and to discuss the Ridvik issue and I happened to have been to that meeting because I was making my proposal to revive the doll project. I was trying to get the GBC, and I made a whole presentation for that there. So I was in the meetings for the whole time. And I thought what I heard was very interesting. I wanted to know more, but I had my project I was working on, so I didn't stay involved. So later, in 1995, I was back in LA for just a few months. 95, 96, I was there for 10 months. And during that time, a devotee came up and said, "You have to read this from Hamsadutta." And we were told by then that the Ridvik literature was poisonous, to avoid it. But Hamsadutta, I had known him enough that I liked, I liked him when he was a devotee, when he was before the Prabhupada left. And so I thought, let me see what he has to say, because he was a guru. And, now he's writing against it. So I thought, at least let me see what he has to say. And besides, I always had the idea that if I'm going to, if I need to know the other side, if somebody is preaching something to me, I need to know how to counter it. So I thought, let me just see. That was the very first time I read the July 9th letter. And I was like, I thought they lied to us this whole time, because I remember a 1978 paper said that Prabhupada said the same thing in that list, that when he listed the 11 Ritviks, that they would be gurus on his disappearance. And I just thought, it doesn't say that in the letter. And I thought they've lied to us this whole time. I got the same impression that a lot of devotees did at that time, that the GBC purposefully lied to us and hijacked Prabhupada's mission. That was Sulochan's original, it just hit you in the gut. You felt like it. But like I said, really, when I researched it, most of them were sincere about thinking they were trying to follow what Prabhupada wanted because of that GBC report. That's what the report said. Prabhupada said he would soon select men who would become gurus on his disappearance. And they thought they were trying to follow what Prabhupada wanted. But the thing hit me that they've lied to us. So I thought, well, now I've read what they say. Let me go and talk to someone who supports the GBC side, see what they say. And I talked to Savas, temple president in Los Angeles, and he said, "You've been reading that poisonous literature, haven't you?" Because I told him.
Said, Who said this?
Well, the first thing I told Savas.
Shivas, okay.
Savas, the temple president.
Okay.
The first thing I told him was
the temple president of
Los Angeles. The first thing I told him was, I just read the July 9th letter for the first time. A letter by Prabhupada. Prabhupada signed. And he said, "You've been reading that poisonous literature, haven't you?" Prabhupada's letter is poisonous? All I said was, I've read the letter that Prabhupada signed and you've been reading that poisonous literature. But anyway, then he said, you have to understand that letter with what Prabhupada said verbally in May 28th. And he said, you have to put them both together.
In context.
You can't just take one. So he said, yes, you've been misled by this poisonous literature. And he said, you have to look, who gave you that literature? He was a devotee no longer living at the temple. And he said he is a fringe devotee. He's not even, he said, you have to follow the GBC, the sannyasis, they're Pukka devotees, they're following, they're first class devotees, they're chanting their rounds, they're living at the temple. And he said, and I started thinking, yeah, what am I? So then I started thinking about it, and I thought, and I wrote an article against the Ritvik. And I wrote that you can't just force Srila Bhaktisiddhanta for him to give you initiation when he's no longer present. You can't force Bhaktivinoda or Rupa Goswami or any, the past acharyas. And so I was saying, we can't force Srila Prabhupada. So I wrote that as the main theme and I wrote it as an article, and I sent it to just a few GBC. I was going to put it on a website, but I sent it to a few GBC I had emails for. I didn't have tamals.
In 1990?
1995, 96. Okay. 1996. I didn't have tamals. Within hours, Tamal sent me an email. One of the other GBC forwarded to him. And he wrote that, he said that he liked my writing very much. And he said that you please continue to write on behalf of the GBC. He may have meant that one topic, but he just said in general, to continue to write on behalf of GBC. And I was really wanting that because I thought I wanted to be like a philosophical devotee. I liked debating and discussing and analyzing. I was from computers and do programming and digital logic design. It was an analyst, So I wanted to analyze these things. And I thought, I was happy to gotten that service. And so I went to do the Ritvik issue again, to write another article. Every time I would look at that Ritvik issue, a dark feeling would come over me. And I couldn't understand what it was. And the GBC were saying this is poisonous literature. I thought, wow, it must really be poisonous, because every time I look at it, I get this dark feeling. And I just put it away. I couldn't go any further. So I decided the GBC were trying to figure out how to restore their respect of the GBC, because at the end of the zonal acharya system, they lost the respect of all the devotees. I mean, of the temple presidents. Even Savas in Los Angeles no longer wanted a GBC. When Rameshwar left and it was the end of the zonal acharya system, no more GBC. He refused to have a GBC in Los Angeles for some time. And even when I moved to Alachua, there were, devotees just didn't want to be under a GBC anymore because of the very bad results of the zonal acharya system. They turned into dictators and all the zonal acharya gurus. And just so eventually they made Bhadranarayan GBC for Los Angeles because he was in San Diego as temple president. But even when he first became GBC, they agreed to allow him to be GBC. So LA Temple had a GBC, but he was not going to be telling anybody what to do there. Eventually, they got more workable. But at the beginning, devotees had lost the respect for the GBC. So I thought, let me take this issue. It has nothing to do with gurus. I'll just help the GBC in this way. I'll analyze this and come up with
arguments to
so
counter
my analyze it was that respect is earned. It isn't just enforced by law. It's earned.
Yeah, especially in a spiritual organization.
Yeah. And so I thought, well, why aren't the people respecting? Because then I realized they're not. I started looking at Prabhupada's instructions to the GBC and how they're to manage. And they're to give one letter he wrote to Madhvisa. They had to give personal guidance to the devotees. Managerial guidance to temple presidents, personal guidance to the devotees, philosophical guidance, and to take care of personal issues. So when you have an issue, you go to your temple president, GBC. And I thought, well, since Prabhupada left, now that they're gurus, now that many of the GBC were gurus, they no longer gave any of this. They no longer were helping even Prabhupada disciples with personal issues or anything. But they only helped their disciples. So if there were a guru at a temple, he would help his disciples. He would give them his guidance and he would help them with their issues. Even if they're in some other GBC's temple in some other part of the world, it was their guru who was giving them guidance, but the rest of the devotees. And my wife at that time she was Indian, but from South Africa, and she had heard about Prabhupada in the 76 when Prabhupada was still here, but she never got to see him. She put Prabhupada's picture on her altar at home, and she was accepting Prabhupada as her guru. When she joined the temple in 79 and went to take initiation from Prabhupada, she was told he was no longer present, and she'd have to take initiation from Jayatirtha. And so he was GBC there and the guru there. But Jayatirtha told her, because she had already accepted Prabhupada as her guru, that he would initiate her on his behalf, on Prabhupada's behalf. So he was her first guru. Then he fell down. And they told everybody, we were now living in Detroit. So they told us, if those devotees who had the guru, Jayatirtha as guru, don't accept another guru, they're no longer members of ISKCON.
Cool.
And she was dressing the deities, and they told her she can't go on the altar anymore because you're not Brahman anymore.
Because your guru...
Because her guru fell down. So she...
And who nominated that guru, it seems?
Who nominated Jayatirtha, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Not Prabhupada.
Not Prabhupada.
So because she wanted to dress the deities, she accepted the next guru who was now the new GBC for Durban, which he was from, was Bhagawan. So he just came into town for a day or two, and she came to and said, I want to take initiation from you, because she still had her connection with her family from Durban. So he agreed and gave her initiation. And
don't you think this is so funny? Disciples, guru falls down and the disciple is held accountable, right?
Yeah.
But the guru who is appointed by the ISKCON body is not accountable.
No. Yeah. And telling them they're no longer an ISKCON devotee if they don't take reinitiation.
What kind of a system is this?
When Bhagawan fell down, I told her, no more. I'm Prabhupada disciple and you're my wife and no more, Actually, I didn't even think about telling her, but Jayatirtha gave her a Ritvik initiation anyway.
Anyway.
So if you think about it, so so now I can't remember what
I'm asking how this journey continued of you were for anti-Ritvik and then to come to Srila Prabhupada for initiation. How did that transition happen?
Yeah, well, anyway, when I wrote that, then he told me to. So what I was going to say about my wife was that when her gurus fell down, and then actually Bhagawan left too, there was no more for her to go to. No one to help her with her issues, with her spiritual guidance, other than her husband. But there was no more GBC that she could go to, because the GBCs weren't doing that duty anymore. If they're not their disciple. They were not really doing that duty. So I wrote my article to the GBC that they have to restore the duties that Prabhupada gave the GBC in the letters, that he gave the instructions, what the duties were of the GBC, to give personal guidance, to give philosophical guidance, and to, take care of personal issues of the devotees. Mm-hmm. Those main things, but there's a number of others. And so I wrote this. And right before I sent it, I was just going through and I saw the Prabhupada's last will, and Prabhupada said, the system of management shall remain as it is, no need of any change. So that was the title of my paper that I sent to the GBC. System of management shall remain as it is, no need of any change. I put big caps. Mm. So then, and I've sent it, and saying the GBC have to restore their duties that Prabhupada gave them. I got no response. Mm-hmm. So a couple months went by, and I wrote and said, I want a response, an official response from the GBC. They have to restore the duties Prabhupada gave them. So at that time, I was in Alachua. Mm-hmm. And my GBC was then Hridayananda. Mm-hmm. So Hridayananda wrote back on behalf of the GBC, on behalf of GBC, saying the GBC rejects your proposal. Mm-hmm. My proposal was the GBC have to follow Prabhupada's instructions that he gave the GBC. But his reasoning was that if we to reestablish these duties, we have to take them away from the initiating gurus and give them back to the GBC. And if we do that, then the initiating gurus will be reduced to no more than a Ritvik priest who perform the ceremony of the initiation, and then the GBC do everything else. He was saying already the GBC have stripped us of our Gua Pujas and, the other things he mentioned in that letter. And he said, now if they take these things away from us, we'll be nothing but Ritvik priests. I wrote back, I was on fire at that point. So I wrote back, these are Srila Prabhupada's instructions to the GBC that they are to follow. So I said, right now, the GBC is in a disobedient position to Srila Prabhupada because they're no longer following his instructions that he has given them. And I said, in that condition, they are spiritually weak. And they will not be able to address this guru issue in such a weak spiritual condition because they are no longer carrying out the duties that Srila Prabhupada have given them. Written duties in the letters, so many letters he's given. So I was on fire. I was telling them, if you do not accept taking these duties and restoring them back to the GBC is making a great offense. And you're going to continue to make offenses to Srila Prabhupada because you're in a weak spiritual condition. Then they wrote back that you are simply, the GBC has concluded that you are a Ritvik and you're simply promoting Ritvikism. And we reject they reject restoring the duties and following Prabhupada's instructions. And that's how I saw it, because that's all I was telling them, that they have to follow Prabhupada's instructions that he gave them.
I remember there's a GBC resolution which says, the purpose of the GBC is to simply is to execute Srila Prabhupada's instructions, and his life and soul. So what kind of...
That is written in the direction of management as the fundamental...
that's fundamental.
Duties of the GBC.
That's exactly what you're asking to them to do.
Yeah, and just follow Prabhupada's instruction for them, especially. Not even... obviously they're supposed to make sure that all the devotees are following Prabhupada's instructions, and they are refusing to restore the duties that Prabhupada gave them. And so I was on fire when I wrote them. And I was like, you are making offenses and going to further fall down. And then they just called me a Ritvik. You're supporting Ritvikism.
So there's a clear line between Achar and Prachar. There's a clear line between Achar and Prachar. You say one thing,
I see,
your public statements are X, Y, Z, all these things, but what you do.
And it was all over that they didn't want to not be guru. And so, I mean, I was telling him, you're in a weak position because you're no longer following. So don't even discuss the guru issue until you're spiritually strong. You have the tejas. Then you can attack that issue. But right now you're spiritually weak because you're no longer following. So they just called me a Ridvik. And at that point, Ridvik still is given a derogatory term. Okay. And I thought, I am not a Ridvik. I just wrote against the Ridvik. And so I started writing more to restore my name amongst the GBC. I'm not a Ridvik. I support the Ridvik idea, which I thought I did, but I had never really delved into it because every time I'd start, I'd have those dark feelings. This is where I finally had to address those dark feelings because I needed now to research this more, to prove, to actually, restore my name, that I'm not a Ridvik. But then I had to approach and study this, and to prove to them I wasn't, I had to study the issue deeper. And the more I studied it, the more I realized this is really what Prabhupada wanted. Nothing made sense. Their system wasn't making sense. Mm-hmm. They have to give up their duties. They have to change the system of management. They have to change the authority structure. They have to, stop doing the duties that Prabhupada gave them just to follow what their guru system, what they say of this guru system. But if they followed the Ridvik system, everything would fall into place. So then, for me to get into this topic, I had to address that darkness. And that's where then I realized, finally, face to face, what is this? And it was all those questions that came up at the time when I learned that these men lied to us about the Prabhupada saying not to come, that I had to block all that out. When at that time, in 1977, when I found out that these men were going to be gurus, I couldn't make sense of it. And I had nowhere to go to answers. There was no July 9th letter. We had no access. We didn't have access to the May 28th. All we had is what the GBC was telling us. And it didn't make sense that Prabhupada would select them. So I had to block that out. I had to push it down.
Let me ask you one fundamental question. Why do you think that these people were not willing to follow Srila Prabhupada? What were their motivations? What made them set aside Srila Prabhupada's instructions and do what they want to do? What was the real motivations?
Let me just go back to that May 28th meeting and the GBC report, because I still conclude that most of the GBC, practically all of them, were innocent at the beginning. At the very beginning, they saw what was presented to them as this GBC report, where Prabhupada was asked two questions on the initiation issue. The first being how to conduct, the way Satsvarup asked it. It was written down differently, but same purport. How to conduct these initiations,
first and second initiation,
in the future, particularly when you're no longer present. So that basically, then the GBC report was that Prabhupada said he would soon select men. On his disappearance, they will initiate their own disciples, grand disciples of Prabhupada, whatever. So, but that is not what he said when you actually hear the tape. Correct. So who wrote that? And I think it was Satsvarup. It looks like his handwriting. That was the official GBC record of the meeting. That's all the other GBC members got. There was only a handful of GBC went into the meetings. All the other only got that. And I can't remember if it was after the 1990 GBC meetings or 1999. I don't remember which. But at one point, there was an ISKCON journal, and they went to Jayapataka and did an interview with him and asked him about the Ridvik issue, and said that they asked him, he was there in Vrindavan at the time of the May 28th meeting, but he was not one of the GBC who went into the meeting. So they asked him after the meeting, did you hear anything about Ridvik? And he said, no. I don't remember his exact words, but I'm just paraphrasing. And he said, no. And no one talked about Ridvik. It was never discussed. Nothing about Ridvik. He didn't hear that until, the 80s and later 80s when this whole thing came up. So he said, then at the time in Vrindavan, nobody mentioned Ridvik. And then he quoted what he heard. And he quoted almost word for word that GBC report, because that's what they were given as the official. This is what Prabhupada said in the meeting. He would soon select men. would be actual gurus on his disappearance. So a lot of the GBC only got that. They got it in good faith that it was what Prabhupada had said. And they were trying to defend and carry out what they thought was Prabhupada's order or mission. And yet, when we look at the May 28th meeting, Prabhupada said he would soon recommend some of the GBC to act as officiating acharya. What's an officiating acharya? So Tamal asked, is that a Ritvik acharya? And Prabhupada said, Ritvik, yes. He didn't say acharya, yes.
Yeah,
Ritvik, yes. They're Ritviks. And that's mentioned in the very beginning of the July 9th directive. The Prabhupada at that meeting said he would soon select Ritviks. What was that an answer to? How are initiation to be conducted in the future, particularly when you're no longer present? So that is Prabhupada's answer. There will be Ritviks. So for us, it's a straight line. When we look at all the evidence, there's a straight line. What the GBC were saying was there was this GBC report which said something totally different than what Prabhupada actually said. Was Satsvarup, did he write that? If that was Satsvarup, whoever wrote it, did they do it on purpose? Or did they just hear what they wanted to hear in that meeting? And if they only heard what they wanted to hear, why? Because they had such strong desires to become gurus. That was my conclusion, is the conclusion of a number of my godbrothers. And Tamal has admitted that. Hamsadutta has admitted that they had very strong desires to want to become guru. And they wanted to become the next acharya, the single one. But at least, like Tamal said, at least he was one of just 11. So they wanted that. So they only heard what they wanted to hear. And that's where it got started. Now, were they all sincere? But one thing that came out, Satsvarup told Jayadvaita that this was Prabhupada's, that he would select men who would become gurus. Jayadvaita said, I will accept that. But he said a lot of devotees might not accept, so they'll want to see some proof. Can we get Prabhupada to sign this, that this is what he said? Satsvarup agreed. And he went to Tamal, and Tamal said no. Tamal said that I understood what Prabhupada said, and that's good enough for him. It's good enough for everybody. And he refused to let even Satsvarup go in and ask Prabhupada to sign. If they had done that, it would have been resolved. Either Srila Prabhupada would have signed, yes, these men will be gurus when I select them, or he'll go, no, you misunderstood.
I think I can just continue talking to you. There's so many aspects I can drag this on. But due to the paucity of time,
so many things to say
also. I think I should tell who's going to watch this, please read Srila Prabhupada's System for Initiations, the Definitive Analysis. It's compiled, written by Ameyatma Dasa, who is a disciple of Srila Prabhupada from 1973. Is there in the movement full time. So you will get new realization, especially as you know, now the Supreme Court order has come and Bangalore has established its own identity. And a lot of, online is a nasty place. Lot of shrill voices. What is Ritvik? What is this one? What is that one?
It's just a fight over the property.
Voices and, it's not a sane debate also. It's simply who can be more smarter, who can be more street smart, not a place for debate, conversation. It's like, in the modern world, who can make memes, who can troll better. It's that kind of an activity. So I would advise, here is a person, disciple of Srila Prabhupada. He has lived in that place. He has seen in and out of the organization. He has got nothing to gain by advocating Ritvik. Rather, he has got much to lose by being in a Ritvik organization. Please hear this conversation. It's a sane debate. Don't be driven by some foolish, immature devotees arguing back and forth. That is no way to learn, understand a subject of such gravity. Please hear from saner voices. Whether you accept Ritvik, whether you don't accept Ritvik, that is another matter altogether. But better to hear from saner voices. And I think Ameyatma Prabhu is a very sane voice. Please listen to him.
I have one more thing to say.
Yes, please.
I didn't just, I read so many of the arguments and so many things, and a lot of them are very shallow arguments.
Exactly.
And they will say, well, the Ritviks think this, when it isn't. And first of all, we're not the Ritviks. The Prabhupada only selected 11 Ritvik representatives to act as priests to do the ceremony. And so I'm not a Ritvik in that sense, but I support the Ritvik representative system, the Prabhupada. But I spent not just... From 99, I had my own research, but then I studied this as a real depth study from 2008 when I went to make a simple one presentation. Well, I studied it from 99 or 95, 96. But I started for this book research in earnest in 2008. And in 14 years, and it culminated in making 30 hours of video, which that script now has become this book.
Great.
So it's not just a few arguments, and it's just not a one or 2 points. They'd have to defeat so many points, and there's so many aspects.
So at least I would advise serious spiritual seekers, not somebody who's just in it for some, as a social or a kind of a take on spirituality. But if you're really serious and if Krishna is your goal, then I would advise, please engage in serious conversation, serious understanding. That will take you to some special place. Otherwise, you can be happy in online, making memes and reels. It will titillate you, it will engage you, have fun. But on a serious note, if you want, then come listen to such kind of people and raise your intellectual ability to a little more higher level. Thank you very much, Prabhu, for enlightening us with all your experiences. And especially, you have seen them all. You have seen their behaviors, their characters, and everything. And you have seen ISKCON in and out. So I think your advice is paramount, very important. And I think it was wonderful to have. Our age is all going off. In another few years, we will not be here. So at least devotees who are going to, and that was our intention also, that we wanted first-hand account of people like you to come on videotape. Just like you see, today we are able to associate with Prabhupada through Prabhupada's books, Prabhupada's conversations, Prabhupada's videos, Prabhupada's audio recordings, and we are able to relate to them. So like in that sense, we wanted all of your thoughts on this.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you very much.
Hare
Hare Krishna.